what we want to achieve. We want a safe, ethical AI that's produced to within reason, and we only have one chance a lot of the time for some of this AI and some of these technologies to get it right, to lay out the frameworks, and when they're switched on or when they're delivered into the ecosystem, I mean, that'll be it. Especially when we're talking about general AI or super AI or some sort of cognitive AI or something. Without the correct parameters, I mean, this is not good. And I'm glad you mentioned as well the IQ issue, the access to information. Already that's come down. Already, if you look around your cities in any modern city today, kids have iPads. I mean, that is a transhumanist tech. That's fundamental. Like they're on these elegant machines from as young as you can get, but you go back 100 years, you go back 30 years, and this was science fiction. Totally, it's becoming integrated with the human species. We're merging already. This is just external, not internal, but and that's where we talk about neural lace and all this other stuff. But yeah, that's so many great points in there. Thank you very much for bringing that to light. But on this show, we want to talk about techno-progressive goals and how to actually achieve some of that and work towards some policies. So you're in the UK there, and you have a techno-progressive roadmap for the UK 2019, where we're at now, to 2035. What was the inspiration? Who helped you do this? What is it? Give us a rundown, David Wood in the UK.
So it's my view that we need a powerful vision to help us escape from our day-to-day concerns. Most people do focus on the present, of course. It demands attention, but sometimes we need to raise our eyes and see the bigger horizon. And the view is that if we can pick out a number of goals, not to be done in the next week or even the year or even within the current electoral cycle, say 5 years, we can pick something, a time horizon that's further away, but still within people's thinking conception. So we thought the year 2035, which is 15 years into the future, 15 and a bit, and a number of goals that actually could be achieved by then if society gets itself together. If society does set its mind on things, tremendous progress can be made, as we can sort of see from, in a bad sense, from what happened in wartime. So much progress and so much technology with an existential threat against a country in that stage. So let's set out a vision. I was also partially inspired by meeting a bunch of parliamentarians in the UK's Parliament. They have set up something called an all-party parliamentary group on longevity. So it's mainly people in our upper house, that's the House of Lords, the people who are experts. Some of them are former politicians, but there were some people from the lower house, the House of Commons, mixing there too. And they have set up a goal, which at first sight seemed impressive, but on second sight isn't ambitious at all. They set the goal that in 2035, that the health span, the average health span of people in the UK will have been raised by 5 years. And so that's what they want to work towards. And in one sense, it's ambitious because sadly, the average health span in the UK is actually slightly moving downwards. And if I can just explain that, health span is the amount of time in your life in which you can live happily, independently. You're not dependent on regular medical assistance of one sort. It also can be measured slightly differently, but with roughly the same results as the amount of time somebody would say that they evaluate their own health as being good or very good, as opposed to poor. And it works out that although the average lifespan in the UK is somewhere in the late 70s, the average health span is 63.1 for a man, 63.6 for a woman. So when they said they're going to raise it by 5 years, that's already bucking the current trend, in which it's actually sadly moving slowly downwards. But I thought, that's not taking the full exponential technologies into proper account. So after some discussion with some of my colleagues in the Transhumanist Party UK, we said, let's set the goal for 90. That seems possible if we can truly take advantage of the things that all transhumanists know about: regenerative medicine, 3D bioprinting, using AI to have a much deeper analysis of the potential for human health. And on that basis, we thought, well, of course, we need to think about a lot more than just physical health. Even more important, arguably, is the mental or emotional health. And there's so much, sadly, so much mental ill health or mental unfitness these days, which is causing many worse problems than other circumstances. So we picked a goal for that as well, that by 2035, 99% of people would report their mental health as being good or very good. And they wouldn't report that they're deeply troubled, often by suicidal thoughts or depression or alienation. So it started from there. And people who work with me in various ways include Chris Montero, who also runs the H+pedia project, Julian Snape, longtime UK-British transhumanist, Matthew Goslin, who's a French person but lives in London. There's Alexander Karan, who is British but is briefly on a secondment overseas in Canada. And then a whole bunch of people online. When I posted the initial draft on Facebook, a whole bunch of people came up with interesting comments. And as a result of that, we have iterated the goals. And I'm sure they'll iterate again. But we've ended up now with 15 such goals. We want to change the political thinking, make all politicians of all parties take these ideas into their consideration.
That's awesome. Yeah, it covers robotics, biotech, neurotech, green tech, AI, and more. It's really interesting, the UK roadmap, and you know, it's good to hear so many people are being involved with this. They're energized by this, and even politicians up at the House of Lords are starting to think about these things. You know, even though that these things, you know, it's the NHS. I mean, it's a mess. I mean, it's an ongoing disgrace in that country. Should it be privatized like the railroads were and become really super inefficient, or should it be more nationalized? And you know, it's a mess. And I can see how the health span of the UK has reduced. I can really see that. But regardless, the UK is still a vibrant country. There's still a lot of great people in the UK. You know, there might be a way to turn some of these things around, and hopefully that you and this roadmap put some energy back into the ideas and some life into the ideas that are emanating from the Parliament right now. You know, because all we ever hear from down here is Brexit. I mean, no one's talking about health or lifespan or roads or, I mean, not infrastructure in the UK, whatever. But you know, like, you know, anything fundamental. I mean, it's all just Brexit, and you know, it's good to see stuff like this, because hopefully, you know, it's a road bump, it gets over, and then this is a time when everyone's bickering and fighting that you could actually infuse fresh ideas. You know, and you
exactly.
The goals are new levels of individual flourishing, new levels of social flourishing, new levels of international flourishing, new levels of environmental flourishing, new levels of cosmic flourishing, and new levels of political flourishing. So, you know, Jose Cordero started his own party in Spain there. You're essentially doing the same thing. I mean, it's starting to pop up. Do you think it's achievable, any of these outcomes?
Absolutely. So, but it's going to take time. Jose Cordero had a very energetic campaign in Spain. In the end, although I think there was maybe about 8,000 votes were cast in his favor. I may have got that. It's disappointing. He was disappointed, and we were all disappointed. So it shows that the course of creating a new party is hard, frankly. And it might work out over a 15-year time period. We look in the UK at other examples of minority parties which have gradually influenced politics, such as the Greens here, which for a long time did nothing, but they have at least one member in the national parliament, and there are several others in the European Parliament. But That's not necessarily the way we think we'll go. We are interested in influencing people in all parties because, frankly, in all the major parties, there are people who think quite seriously and quite constructively sometimes about all of these issues. They won't all think about all of the issues typically, so some of them might be concerned about some of the issues. And we want to strengthen these people in all parties if they are positive forces for a better techno-progressive vision. And perhaps our party, therefore, will just act as a think tank, activists doing campaigns which inspire others. Although there also is the possibility that if things don't change enough, provided some of the electoral system gets revised and we change from what we have in the UK currently, which is a first past the post system, which leads people to be very nervous of voting for minority parties. The fear is that if they vote for a minority party, that will be a wasted vote, and they'll let somebody that they dislike intensely come in. And so they often therefore vote for what they might think is their second or third best choice instead. And this makes it really hard on the whole for new parties to break through. Now, there's a big move in the UK to transform that. People tried about 10 or 15 years ago and that got nowhere, but there's a new mood to change that too. And that's one of our goals, not for 2035, but one of the interim goals for 2025 when we're talking about transforming the political situation. You mentioned the 6 spheres in which our 15 goals are grouped. And that last sphere, the sphere of improved political flourishing, one of the goals is that we will in the UK respect and admire our politicians. We'll no longer see our politicians as being self-serving and divisive and incompetent. And how we're going to get there is a number of things. And one of them is this interim goal. And by the way, all the 15 goals for 2035 have got 2 interim goals for 2025. One of them for 2025 is that we will abolish this first past the post system, and we'll therefore allow more people to cast what they would see as an authentic vote. So I'm a big fan of this ranked choice voting, which I see has been adopted by other transhumanists elsewhere in the world too. We need to get the rest of the world to adopt that as well.
Yeah, the Australians pretty much have ranked choice voting, and it does really well here because you really vote for who you actually want as opposed to the lesser of evils. And yeah, you end up with a political duopoly like in the United States, where Republicans and Democrats, the only challenge they ever faced was from the Whigs. I mean, who remembers the Whigs? I mean, not me. So but this argument about in the UK especially about the Labour and the Tories. I mean, Brexit Party, even though it was a protest vote, it was Europe. You can see that the electoral mass is trying to say we're sick of these two parties, but they're scared to actually do anything about it. But they are trying to send a message that there's a whole bunch of issues, 21st century issues, which neither of these parties are addressing. And David Cameron is a genius because by throwing Brexit in the mix, I mean, he sent everyone back 50 years to argue about Brexit when really then they can get away with ignoring some of these other larger issues which you're talking about. But the population will only buy that for so long. They'll only buy it for so long, and then once these issues are nipping at the heels, then they'll have to change again. And you might see that, and you won't have the luxury if there's a hard Brexit to experiment with protest votes in Europe anymore, and it'll have to come down to not county, where are you? UK. You'll have to come down to village levels or the local level, like municipal elections or local elections, and this is going to have a change, and the UK transhumanist party will have an impact in saying that these are the actual policy issues that people want to talk about, because this is 21st century issues. This isn't 19th 18th century industrial law reform anymore. I mean, we've done that.
It's a vision of the future rather than a vision of going back to some element of the past. You know, people are feeling deeply uneasy about society. Many people perceive they are somehow being left behind. They're seeing that others apparently are doing very well, but they feel that there isn't a fair opportunity for them to have what they see as a reasonable stake in the present society. Therefore, they're thinking, let's try and find a simpler baseline. So there are lots of people looking at elements of the past. We need to make them instead look at elements of a better future. Because frankly, going back to the past isn't going to satisfy anybody. It's a misdiagnosis of the cause of our problems. The cause of our problems isn't an international situation with Europe. It isn't that there are too many immigrants or whatever. The real cause of our problems are not taking full advantage in a techno-progressive way of the fruits of technology. The way things are going currently, not only are health spans going down, but many measures of inequality are rising too. And certain measures of equality are fine. In fact, certain measures of inequality are important to a functioning society, but it seems to have pushed too far, and it's pushed many people into a very uncomfortable situation, both in the UK and overseas.
I agree. And one of these levels is social flourishing. In social flourishing, in a world of increasing automation, how are you going to sell this idea that automation is good? You know, a lot of the rhetoric is protectionist language. It's bring the jobs back. It's China's stealing our manufacturing. It's all this sort of stuff. And then when they do come back, I mean, it's all automated anyway. But in the increasing automation and social flourishing, how do you marry the two, and how do you sell it that this is a good thing as opposed to a bad thing? I mean, you guys are, when we talk about Luddites, I mean, we're talking about the UK, we're talking about, cotton mills or whatever, textiles. How do you sell this?
So it's two things. First of all, it's convincing people how much automation can do if we let it. There's a whole argument about, automation is not going to achieve that much, really. It's going to change bits of people's jobs. And of course, people need to retrain a bit. But if they retrain, they're going to be fine. In reality, the possibilities are much more widespread than that, much more wide implications. And we want to convince people of that possibility. So that means educating people, not just about today's AI, which is remarkable, especially what deep learning can do, but what the next forthcoming waves of AI can do. So that's what I did last night. I was speaking at a pub in Chiswick, an event with 50 people in the audience, not about today's AI, but why there's likely to be new waves of AI in the future that are even more dramatic in their capabilities. So first of all, they're setting out the technical possibility. But then, as you said, it's very important that we manage to reassure people that if this disruption happens, they won't be completely left behind and feeling that they are abused. And it ties up with the prevailing philosophy. The prevailing philosophy of society is sometimes called the Protestant work ethic or the Calvinist principle. It is that unless you're working, you are substandard. You are a scrounger. You should be scorned. You should be reproached. And that's a prevailing philosophy which arguably made good sense for most of human history. People should have a pressure to become a contributing member of society and earning money for that. But we need to paint the picture of a very different vision in which robotics and automation are producing enough for everybody, and we don't need to earn money anymore. So that is one of the goals for 2035, that no one will need to get a job to earn money in order to have a good basic quality of life. There will be an abundance of the things needed for good food, good accommodation, good education, good healthcare, and a baseline level of safety and security. And various other politicians have been talking about things like a universal basic income. In America, Andrew Yang calls it a freedom dividend. That's part of the answer. But it's not the main part, actually. The main part is simply we should be setting the direction of the economy to lower the prices. So instead of thinking about GDP up, 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 we should be thinking about bringing down the costs of accommodation, bringing down the costs of food, bringing down the cost of education, bringing down the cost of healthcare by various smart interventions. And that's how we should be measuring the health of the society, not by its GDP, nor even by how many people are in full employment. We should be measuring the health of society in terms of how many people are able to flourish every single day. And various countries around the world, and one of your neighbors, New Zealand, has more attention in its economic policies to thinking about the impact on human flourishing and well-being. Of course, economic prosperity is a part of it, but it shouldn't be the lion. It should be the contributor. And it's more important that we reach a higher state of consciousness and a higher state of well-being. So there's the two angles. Talk about the technology, convince people that the technology could change much more than it is doing already. And secondly, talk about a better way to organize society structured around an abundance and a universal basic income and other redistributions of some of